Today in this session, we are going to learn how to paraphrase and summarize and express oneself in an academic writing. This session is going to be a detailed guide on outlining steps, strategies, some best practices for paraphrasing and summarizing, and some practical techniques of how to express oneself in an academic writing. In an academic writing, expressing oneself freely and originally is very important. However, first we are going to take a look at what are the techniques of paraphrasing and summarization. Let us take a look at the module overview of today's session. The module overview. Today we are going to discuss core concepts, that is paraphrase, summary and quotations, preparatory steps before paraphrasing and summarizing, step-by-step methods of how to paraphrase, step-by-step methods of how to summarize, some best practices and common pitfalls that students face while writing academic articles, ethical considerations and academic integrity and how it is maintained while writing an academic article, while expressing yourself, what matters in an academic writing when one expresses originally, and some practical techniques and tools in the process, and that will give you a detailed idea of how to go about academic writing. So first we will look at the three core concepts: paraphrasing, summarization and quotations. Let's take a look. What is a paraphrase? Restating a specific idea from a source in your own words with the same meaning, usually of almost similar length to the original but expressed a little differently, is a paraphrase. So it is another way of looking at the same thing and almost keeping to the same length. Summarization is a little different from paraphrase. What is a summary? It is condensing the main points or arguments of a source into a shorter form, focusing on the core ideas rather than the details. And what is a quotation? A quotation is an exact reproduction of the source enclosed into quotation marks with page or paragraph citation. This is used sparingly for emphasis or when wording is particularly distinctive from a required source. We shall look at the distinctions, that is, the differences between paraphrase, summary, and quotation now. Let us take a look. While quotation preserves exact wording from a reading resource, paraphrasing preserves most of the original meaning, and summary, on the other hand, distills the main points into a briefer edition of the original source. Let us now give you one example. A quotation is always within the quotation marks. Here is an example. He who has no light is unfortunate enough, but utterly miserable is he who, having it, has been deprived of it, or has forgotten all about it. Unquote. Rabindranath Tagore, The Center of Indian Culture, English Writings of Rabindranath Tagore, edited by Shishir Kumar Roy, Sahitya Akademi, 1994. Now this one passage has been directly lifted from the original text, so it comes within quotation marks. Now the same thing, if it is paraphrased, how will it look? According to Rabindranath Tagore, in his essay, The Center of Indian Culture, a person without enlightenment is indeed unfortunate, but far from pitiable is one who once possessed inner light and has since lost it or allowed it to fade from memory. So a paraphrase, we can see, is an indirect explanation of a quotation. Let us now take a look at the addition, which would be a summary. Tagore says in his essay, the center of Indian culture, that those who lose or forget their inner light are more tragic than those who never had it. So you see, from quotation to paraphrase to summary, a passage becomes briefer and smaller in length. And it requires a technique of how to turn a resource into a paraphrase or a summary. We would now take a look at a few preparatory steps before paraphrasing or summarizing. So, one must first understand the source thoroughly. Then only he or she would be able to understand how much to take and what is not relevant, which can be deleted. We would now take a look at the preparatory steps before paraphrasing or summarizing. In an academic writing, when one utilizes resources, then the resource should be understood thoroughly before it is used. Take notes in your own words. Identify the target level of paraphrase or summary. One must understand how much to paraphrase, how much to summarize. Paraphrase it when you need to discuss a specific idea in detail. Summarize it when you need to convey the overall argument or findings but need not go into the details of it. However, one must remember that in order to keep the right spirit of the resource that is being utilized, the meaning and the nuances of the original text must be retained when it is being utilized in an academic writing. Be mindful of technical terms, data, and qualifiers as it must be used in an academic writing for evidential purposes. A few words that we can use here are possibly, maybe, significant. These are certain words which help us to connect the evidences with our writing. Plan your integration of the utilization of resources. All the resources that are utilized in an academic writing must have a sequential and logical connection with the writing in question. Otherwise, there would be no unity of thought. Decide where in your argument the paraphrase or the summary will fit and how it would support your thesis. It is also important to paraphrase or summarize so that unnecessary or redundant information is cut out from the academic writing. We would now take a look at the 4 steps of paraphrasing in an academic writing. Let us take a look. Comprehension, reconstruction, verification, and integration. These are the 4 steps of paraphrasing. So let us take a look at the first point, comprehension. Reading out the passage from the original source and understanding it is very important before paraphrasing. Then comes reconstruction. Once we understand the resource, then it is easier for us to reconstruct it in a slightly different language. Next, verification. This is a very important step where one must verify whether the reconstructed passage is similar in meaning as far as the original resource is concerned. And then finally, integration. How this newly constructed paragraph integrates into one's own academic writing must be done very carefully. Here are some useful paraphrasing techniques. Synonym substitution with sentence reordering. Replace key terms with synonyms and rearranging the sentence structure is a very, very common way of paraphrasing. Conceptual re-expression. Reframing the idea at a higher or a lower level of abstraction is once more a common technique of paraphrasing. Voice and stance shift. Changing the emphasis or the author's stance, example, presenting it as a counterpoint, is also a common way of paraphrasing from a given resource. Sentence splitting or merging. Breaking down long sentences into shorter ones or combining concise points into a single sentence can also be a useful technique of paraphrasing. Now, we would move on to how to summarize. Here are 4 steps of summarization. Identify core elements, distill and synthesize, reconstruct in your own words, and accuracy and citation. So, what are the summarization techniques? When summarizing multiple sources, synthesizing them to highlight broader trends or themes must be done. Use topic sentences that reflect the source's central argument. We must remember that summarization often happens of a single resource, and often summarization can happen of multiple resources which are talking of similar themes or similar arguments. There, the texts can be clubbed and summarized into a concise point of reference. We would now do a quick activity. When you are attempting to write an academic article on any given topic, you must have already read around a few or a wide range of resources already. We would need this for our first activity. Now select any vital resource and identify a slightly long paragraph from that book that wholly fits your argument. Now you can use that entire paragraph as a long quotation in your original academic writing. Otherwise, you can also use either paraphrasing or summarization technique. So what you can do? You could have completely lifted it as a quotation. However, now you would follow the paraphrasing techniques and create a paraphrase of the said paragraph. Further, select 2 or more resources and attempt a brief summary by merging the central ideas of those identified areas. So, either you can choose multiple resources and attempt a summary, or choose one singular reference book, lift up a paragraph that fits directly to your original academic writing, and try and paraphrase it in the given techniques that we discussed right now. Before doing a paraphrasing or a summary, we must remember a few checklists. Do I fully understand the source idea? Does it fit with my academic argument? Have I written the concept in my own words? Is the meaning preserved accurately? Have I avoided copying distinctive phrasing or the syntax? Is there a proper citation right after the paraphrase or summary? Does the paraphrase or summary integrate smoothly into my argument? These are the checklists one must remember while utilizing resources in an academic writing. I must emphasize on the last 2 points that we mentioned right now. Is there a proper citation right after the paraphrase or summary? Now, this is very important. In an academic writing, if we are either paraphrasing or summarizing or even quoting a passage from a resource, the citation should be given immediately after it or should be provided with a superscript and right at the end of the document as an end note. This minimizes the accusations or the problems of plagiarism. And most importantly, even before that, when we are looking at or referring to resources, we must remember whether those resources are directly relevant to our own argument. Utilizing resources redundantly can give a misleading direction to an academic writing and become an redundant inclusion. This should be avoided. Take only what is directly required to support your argument. At this point, we would do a quick quiz. What are the 4 steps of paraphrasing? Let us remember: comprehension, reconstruction, verification, and integration. Let me repeat: comprehension, reconstruction, verification, and integration. When a resource utilizes all these 4 steps, then the paraphrasing is a perfect one. Now we shall discuss a few common pitfalls that writers face while writing an academic article. The foremost is patchwriting. We must now define what is patchwriting. Patchwriting is a form of poor academic writing where the writer closely follows the structure and wording of a source text, making only minor changes, such as replacing a few words with synonyms or slightly altering the syntax or the sentence order, without fully rephrasing it or adding original interpretation. Now, too many such patch writing reduces the quality of an original academic article. This patch writing technique should be avoided by all means. Next, over-reliance on quotations. Using quotations too many times without paraphrasing would suffice, but this actually leads to a kind of a fragmented prose in an academic writing. Next, inadequate citation. Missing author, year, or pagination as required by a style is a very common problem that writers face in an academic writing. Inadequate citation is something that should be avoided by all means. When there is very limited information available for a resource, then every style sheet also provides a detailed guidance of how to write about that as well. We will now take a look at a few ethical considerations and academic integrity that we must remember while attempting an academic article. We must first remember: cite correctly. Follow the required citation style. It can be APA, MLA, Chicago, IEEE, anything. However, including page numbers wherever applicable is very important. Next, quote judiciously. Reserve direct quotes for precise language or pivotal phrases. It should be used rare or in a very special occasion in an academic article that actually increases the emphasis and significance of those quotations. Paraphrase responsibly. Even when paraphrasing, the source must be acknowledged. Do not present the original ideas as your own if they are not, because that would mean plagiarism. Avoid mosaic plagiarism. What is mosaic plagiarism? Do not mix phrases from multiple resources into a single paragraph without attribution. Now, mixing up many quotations and not using quotation marks is another kind of a plagiarism, and we call it mosaic plagiarism. Check institution policies. Different fields and universities may have specific guidelines for paraphrase and summary. So before attempting an academic writing, one must be careful of these specific instructions or policies or guidelines for paraphrase and summary. We will now discuss a few practical tools to write. Note-taking method. Initially, when we are looking at different resources that would support our own argument in our own academic article, we use many kinds of tools for note-making purposes. Mind maps or concept outlines to capture core ideas. Remember, Cornell Notes is also a structured note-taking system developed by Walter Pock at Cornell University to help students organize information. It is a very standard form of note-taking which improves comprehension and enhances revision techniques while writing an academic article. Plagiarism checkers. Use reputable tools to screen drafts but do not rely solely on them. They can miss nuances of citations. So, such plagiarism checkers should also be used very judiciously and wisely so that important nuances or points are not deleted by mistake. Reference management. It is a very important tool while writing. Tools like EndNote, Zotero, Mendeley help organize sources and citations nowadays. Writing aids. Paraphrase checklists, style guides, and discipline-specific glossaries help maintain lots of accuracies in an academic writing. One must familiarize oneself with various style guides like the APA, MLA, Chicago manual so that citation is balanced, standardized, and completely uniform throughout an academic article. Now, we would move on to the third section of our discussion, that is, expressing in your own words. We must remember that in an academic writing, expressing oneself in one's own words is extremely important because an academic writing should be original and one's own thought process should be completely reflected in that academic writing. An academic writing, one must remember, is one's own. It can have many references, but at the end of the day, it must have that touch of originality. That is why it is very important to have a majority of that article completely written in one's own words. Of course, quotations, paraphrase, summary would help, but it can only help. It cannot become an entirety of an academic article. At least at that time, I would not be able to call it mine own. So in order to call it mine own, one must remember at least 70 to 75% of that academic writing must be in original language. We must remember academic writing demands clarity, originality, and integrity. Expressing ideas in your own words while accurately representing sources is essential for building credibility, avoiding plagiarism, and demonstrating your understanding of the material. We must know, why does it matter in an academic writing? Originality and integrity. It demonstrates your own understanding and interpretation, not merely reproducing someone else's wordings. This is very important as we discussed earlier. An academic writing should have your own original ideas. It can be supported by other resources, but its originality must be sustained. Clarity and voice. Everyone has his own style of expression. So building a distinct scholarly voice that reflects your own disciplinary norms and your own thought process is very important. And it can only be done when you are expressing yourself in your own words. Avoiding plagiarism. Proper paraphrasing and summarizing with appropriate citations, preventing intellectual theft, is a very important point to remember in modern academic writing scenario. So, avoiding plagiarism can only be done when one has the habit of using original expressions in his own writing. Then finally, and the most important one, is critical engagement. Reframing information only shows your analytic stance, synthesis, and evaluation. How much you understand the area that you are working on can be only reflected from your own critical engagement with the writing. The more it is original, the more it reflects your own deep understanding of the subject. At this point, we would again take a quick quiz. What is a Cornell Note? We just discussed what is a Cornell Note. A Cornell Note is a particular technique of taking down points, making brief observations on a given text, and making a gist of it. It is a very specific technique of note making that students and scholars use while writing an academic article. We would now do a final activity. Recent studies indicate that sustainable consumption reduces environmental footprints, but behavioral adoption scales differently across cultures due to varying social norms and economic constraints. This is a hypothetical quotation that we have utilized. Now, we would attempt a sample paraphrasing of this specific quotation. Here is one possibility that is put up on the screen. Let us take a look. Recent research shows that choosing sustainable consumption patterns can lessen environmental impact. However, the rate at which people adopt these behaviors varies by culture because of different social expectations and financial realities. So, that is how a quotation is paraphrased. As we are coming to the closure of this session, let us quickly summarize what are the things we learned today. So now, at the end of this session, we have very clear ideas of what is a quotation, what is a paraphrase, and what is a summary. We also learnt some common pitfalls that writers face in the process of writing an academic article. And finally, why is it important to write academic articles in one's own words as much as possible? Because that can only sustain the originality of an academic writing. At the end, as we always do, we will close with that very known phrase. Keep thinking, keep writing, and keep writing better. Thank you.